everyone, and welcome to my 12 tags of 2015 video, and this is my April tag. Well, not this one because this belongs to Tim Holtz, so this is my original inspiration, and you can see that Tim's been busy with his new flower stamps and watercolouring, and he's come up with a great way to display your little watercolour project on a tag. So I'm going to improvise with things that I have in my collection. So I don't have the stamps that Tim has, but I do have stamps of two of my favourite flowers. So this one is the iris stamp that I'm going to be using. So I've had this in my collection for quite a long time. You can see some great images there. And I'm also going to be using a couple of daisy stamps from the Da Vinci set, which are rubber dance stamps. So daisies and irises are going to feature on my two tags. So I'm stamping onto watercolour cardstock, which I've trimmed to the size that I want for my tag. I'm using a cobalt blue archival ink because I just wanted it to be a little bit softer than the black. As it happens, it does turn out looking quite black on the tag, but I've started with this blue ink and I'm going to stamp my tag with this gorgeous iris. So looking at the space I've got left at the side of my iris, I think I'm going to need to create a mask so that I don't overlap it when I stamp my second iris. So I'm going to cut out a couple of these at a time. So what I've done is I've stamped the iris up against that sticky edge on your post-it note pad, and I've stamped my iris and I'm cutting it out, but I'm going to cut out 3 little irises at the same time. So I've just pulled 3 pages from the post-it note pad, and then I'm going to carefully cut out this image. And by cutting 3 of them, it means that I've got some masks cut all in one go, so that I can just pop them in with those stamps and I can use them if I need them at a later date. So it really is a good thing to do. If you're using a technique that requires more than one mask because you're layering up more than one image, it's a great way to do that. But it's also, once you've spent the time fussy cutting, it's a great way to get the most out of that time by cutting out some more images while you're creating the mask that you actually want to use. And then I could just peel away one of my masks and attach it to my stamped image. So spend a little bit of time getting it all nice and lined up, and then I've got 2 for later on. So I'll just pop them in the pocket with the stamps, and I can use that at another date. So a little tidy up, and then I'm ready to stamp my second image. You can see it doesn't overlap much, but it does a little bit, so it was worth cutting that mask out. So I'm going to be using the 2 daisy stamps from the Rubber Dance Da Vinci set to create a bunch of daisies on my second tag. So I'm starting out by stamping a daisy or 2 at the bottom of my tag, and then I'm going to work up and across the tag to create a little spray of daisies. So that's going to mean that I need to cut myself some masks. So exactly as I did before, again working along that sticky edge of the stamp, I'm just stamping, and this time I'm just going to cut out 2 of each daisy. Again, I'm just going to pop them in the pocket should I need them again in the future. So I've got my masks and I'm ready to start stamping the rest of the spray of daisies. So you can see that now I've covered up that first stamp, and it looks like the second image is behind the first. So again, just working out where to put my next daisy. And then this time I'm going to be using both of the masks as I stamp the final daisy in the composition. So as I begin to colour my images, I wanted to tell you a little bit about the watercolour paper that I'm using. It's quite a thick watercolour paper, quite heavy, which means it won't warp too much as I add the water to them. It will a little bit, as you will see. I'm just adding water to those images, which will make my paint flow as I create my background. And I'm going to be working on a messy mat because I'm going to use a combination of splattering and brushwork to create my backgrounds. So you can see they just curl slightly, but that won't matter as I'm creating the backgrounds. Definitely recommend that you follow the link over to Tim's blog to check out this month's tag, because his tutorial gives you a different way of doing the watercolouring, plus he uses a spritzer to create his background, which is quite interesting. I don't have those, so I'm going for a slightly alternative look. So you can see I'm using my distress stains to start with, and I've got Squeezed Lemonade and Salty Ocean, and I'm just stippling a little bit of that yellow onto the tag. So I'm loading up my brush and then tapping it against a glue stick as it happens, but it could be anything, a pen or a paintbrush. Just saves doing it on your finger, because you can end up with a bruised finger if you're a little bit excessive with your tapping. And then I'm going to be also doing the same thing with that Salty Ocean. And because I've got the slightly moist surface on my watercolour paper, the colours will start to run, as you can see. I'm going to encourage that along a little bit, but now I'm using my brush to add more of that blue and move that ink around. Now I achieved quite a vibrant look with this technique because I've used the colours straight from the bottle, but if you wanted slightly lighter colours, you could water down the distress stains or the distress ink before you start to add them to your tag. So I'm liking how this is turning out, so I'm just going to dry these off because I want to, again, just splatter them to get a few more little dots and texture onto my tag. And I've had to dry them off a little bit so that they don't just blend into the background. So again, just splattering a little bit, and it just adds a little bit of texture and kind of takes the place of the little air brush spritzer that Tim used on his tag. So this is an alternative if you don't have one of those. So just remember, you need to dry off your background in order for those little dots to not blend in with the background, if that makes sense. And just keep dotting away until you're happy with your background. Zooming in a little bit closer for the colouring in, and you might think that I've got all those sort of blue shades going on my irises. Will they affect the end result? And you'll see, because these colours react to water, they kind of blend into what I am adding on top. So you'll see that texture starts to disappear as I start to colour in the images. And I'm using a fine paintbrush, and again, where you see squares of colour on my mat, you know that I'm using the ink directly, or ink that I've added to my mat from my distress ink pads. And when you see a little puddle, then I'm using distress stains, and it all depends what colours I've got in my distress stains to whether I've used ink or whether I've used the distress stains. So I'm just colouring in the stalks first, and I added the yellow to get the highlights along the left-hand edge of my stems and leaves, and then I came back in and added the green shadows. Now I intend to decoupage the iris that's on the left, so really I probably didn't need to spend too much time colouring that one in because I'm going to cover some of those areas over, but it gave me a little bit of practice at the watercolouring. So you can see that I'm using now the yellow, and which is Squeezed Lemonade and Seedless Preserves, and I am blending those together on these bottom petals. I think these petals on an iris got a special name, but I don't know what they are, but they're the ones that have the extra colour. So you start out with the lighter colours, and then you bring in slightly darker areas of shading on top. And you can see I've just removed a little bit of the purple there with my brush, and I'm adding a little bit of yellow into those petals. So I've dried off my first iris and now I'm coming in to do the second. So again you can see I'm starting with the light colour, so I add plenty of water to my little puddle of ink and then I'm slightly darkening the colour and in particular darkening the area around the centre of the leaf. And then I'm just again adding a little bit of that yellow. It kind of brings the two petal areas together. And then finally adding yellow to the centres of the two petals that hang down, and then coming in with the seedless preserves on the outside. So starting light and then just blending up the intensity of colour once I'm happy that the two colours have blended together. So if you add too much paint, you can always just wet the area with your paintbrush and then blot with a piece of kitchen roll, and you will find that you can lift some of that colour if you make a mistake and do things a little bit heavy. So you've got, you know, a few options when you're working with paints and inks that are reactive with water. So you can see here I just used a dry brush there to lift out some of that little puddle of ink because there was too much purple in that area. I'm using exactly the same colours on my daisies, and you can see here because the leaves and the stems are quite narrow on this flower, I'm not really having much of an opportunity to add any shading. And I've decided to use the squeeze lemonade on the petals of the daisies and then give them a gorgeous plum coloured centre with my seedless preserves. So starting with the petals, and then I'm adding some of that gorgeous seedless preserves to the flower centre, and you can see I'm just taking the colour down a little bit onto those petals, and it really does give a nice effect just to blend a little bit of that colour down onto the petals. So once I've added that first little bit of colour onto the petals, then I come back in the opposite direction with a little bit of that yellow, and the two colours blend together nicely. Now it was at this point that I thought actually I'd quite like some of that colour in my background, so I've just wet my paper again, and then I'm just coming in and just blending a little bit of that seedless preserves into my background. So just make sure that you wet your card first in the area where you're going to add that colour so that it blends nicely out and into the colour that you already have laid down on the tag. So the next thing that I wanted to do was stamp and colour the images or the portions of images that I'm going to be decoupaging onto one of the iris flowers and a couple of the daisies. So I'm colouring them in exactly the same way. You can see I've isolated this front leaf and the two leaves that hang down, or petals should I say, of the iris, and I'm also going to be adding some of those green leaves. So I'm just looking at the iris and deciding which areas of the greenery are in the foreground, and I've isolated the leaves and the little bits of I don't know what to call it, but it's where the flower attaches to the stem, and I just want that little overhanging piece of iris off the iris bud. And then once it's all dry, it's time to cut out the little details, ready to decoupage them onto my base, the original piece of artwork. So some of these pieces are a little bit fiddly, so make sure that once you've spent that time cutting them out, that you put them in a safe place before you start to shape them and add them to your tag. Before I do that, just in case anything shows once I decoupage this onto the original, I'm just colouring the backs and making sure there's no white edges to the pieces that I've cut out by just giving them a quick wash with the colours that they happen to be, the green or the purple. You can see that on the back of this iris piece. And then I'm using a piece of foam and a ball tool just to shape each of my elements. So you can see I'm just adding some of that vein work and just cupping the leaves slightly, and then I'm using a silicone glue to attach those petals into place, and it just gives the effect of lifting the iris off the page. So you can see what I said about some of the smaller elements. They're a little bit fiddly, just need to tuck that one underneath the leaf, and the silicone glue gives you time to work the piece before it dries, because it stays wet for a little while, but once it's dry it's quite solid, so it really does keep that dimension on your piece of work. So as I'm doing this, I didn't realise, but the way that I'm going to attach this to my tag means that I will have to take some of these, or probably this bottom leaf, off the tag once I add it into its tag base. So just be a little bit aware of that if you're going to try this for yourself. Any of the decoupaged elements that sit underneath the band that's going to go across the front of your artwork may need to be removed. And it's worse here because I picked the two lower daisies to decoupage. It wasn't the end of the world because I can just move the daisy up because they're all exactly the same. So I'm just stamping a couple of flower heads, a couple of flower centres and a couple of leaves, and I will be using those to decoupage onto my card. So once they're all painted again, I'm just cutting all my pieces carefully out, and then I will do the same again. I'll colour the backs of each of those pieces so that no white will show once it's decoupaged onto the base tag. So it's a little bit difficult to shape the leaves, as you can see here, chasing it round the piece of foam. They're probably better done with your fingers, just curling them slightly away from that background image. And you just need to be a little bit careful about your silicone glue. You might just need to use the tip of a skewer, or as I'm doing here, my ball tool. Shouldn't really do that. And just scrape away any excess that you can see on the front of your tag. So then I'm just curving the petals up and away from the tag with my fingers, and then I'm going to draw around the outside of each of those little flower centres, and that just cups them slightly, and then I'm going to add them to the flowers. And you'll see that the bottom daisy will be the one that I remove and move up to the top daisy. So all wasn't lost, but I'm just pointing it out to you so that if you decide to try this yourself, then you know the pitfalls before they happen. So after trying different colours to make my base tags with, I did go back to the original craft, which is what Tim used on his tag this month. So you can see I'm going to have to create my little word slightly differently than he did on his tag, my little word band. So I'm marking the edges at the moment of the piece of artwork. So that's the width of my artwork, and I know then where to cut to create the little band. Now the words were cut out using my Cricut, so you can see that I haven't got my tag shape yet. So I'm creating the band first, and then I'll slip in the artwork and I'll be able to judge how it's going to sit on my tag. So So I'm just cutting in between the lines to create the little band, and you can see I'm just about to tuck the artwork in off camera. And then once you've got that in position, you can then trim away the edges, the excess edges, to start to form your tag. So repeating that process with the word life, which I'm just going to have slightly to the right on my tag. So I'm using the artwork to gauge the width. So I'm just sliding that up over the word, and then I'm going to use a pencil to mark the width that I need to cut in order to slide this artwork into that little band that I'm going to create, and then turning it 90 degrees and using my Tim Holtz ruler to line everything up so I get a nice straight band with the word life cut out. I used the Cricut cartridge Opposites Attract, so I used the two different fonts in order to create the two words that will sit on my tag. So it really does help having the gridded ruler, because I can make sure that everything is straight and that I get a nice neat finish, ready to tuck my artwork into this second band. So I'm going to stitch this into place before I create my tag shape, and you can see I've already removed one of the flowers in order to slip this daisy into the little life band, but now I'm going to remove my second daisy, which I will stick back on again in a moment, so that I can go around with this little tiny sewing machine and add a blue stitched border to my tag, which secures it in position. So I'm happy with that. As I set about just finishing off the stitching so that nothing comes undone, I just thought I'd tell you a little bit about that sewing machine. I get asked quite a lot of questions about it. It's quite old. I've had it a long time. I had it in my cupboard a long time before I finally got round to using it. And all I can say about it is it does what I need it to do. I've heard a lot of bad reports about it. One of its disadvantages is that it doesn't have much of a reach, so you can't do very big projects on it, and second of all, that the stitches do tend to come undone quite easily because it's a kind of chain stitch rather than a normal sewing machine stitch, so you do have to be careful when you take the work out from under the foot of the sewing machine. But it does what I need it to do. But I would say, I'm not even sure if you can still get hold of it, but I'm pretty sure that you can get smaller, more updated versions of similar sewing machines. So you can see here I've trimmed it into a tag shape, and I was just deciding, I thought it needed a little bit more colour on the outside. You know me, I like to frame my tags, and I come up with a plan for that in a moment. So just adding that little bit of colour back into the daisy where I removed the decoupage element, and then I'm sticking it back onto the tag. So you would never know I made a mistake. So if you've watched any of my tag videos before, you know I like to frame my tags, and I decided to create another little watercolour piece of paper to put as a frame on each of these tags. So I'm just following exactly the same technique as I showed you when I made my little artworks for the centres of my tags. So just wetting the paper first. I've sort of roughly outlined my tags so I know the area I need to cover with colour, and then I am going to add the yellow and blue distress inks, and then I'm going to add a little touch of that Seedless Preserves. If you check out Tim's blog, you'll see he created an ombre effect on his ribbon using two colours of distress marker, and I'm going to be using two colours of my distress inks, and you just seen me add the Seedless Preserves down one side of the ribbon, and then I'm just switching the ribbon over once I've cleaned up all that seedless preserves, and I'm going to come across on the opposite side with the yellow. And then once the yellow is added, I'll spritz my ribbon with water, and that will encourage the colour to blend into one another. So mimicking the effect that I've got on the petals of my flowers on my ribbon. So this really is a fun way to create ribbons that exactly match your projects. So you can see I'm just rubbing that ink right along the edge of the ribbon, and then I will use a spray of water to encourage the two colours to move in the ribbon and blend together in the centre. Just spritzing along the length of the ribbon with my water spray, and you can see the colours already starting to move, and then I'll put that one to one side to do its thing and to dry off ready so that I can use them on my tag. So it really is quite a bit like a tie-dye effect really. So my background is dry, so I'm ready to cut out the little tag shapes. So I'm going to glue the tags into position and then just trim a fine border all the way around. So roughly about 1/16 of an inch border I like to leave to frame each of my tags. So adding the glue. You could use a paper trimmer to trim your tags out, but I just find it's a little bit more precise using my scissors. I can get a nice fine border all the way around my tag. And then repeating that process with the second tag. So and then from my leftovers, I'm just using a 1/2 inch circle punch to punch 2 little reinforcers to go on the tops of the tags. So I've cut out the words beautiful and natural, so beautiful life and natural world, to go onto my tags. Tim Holtz has got his own dies, word dies that fit perfectly onto tags and cards, so he used those to create this effect, but I've been able to mimic it using my Cricut, and this is the other font on the Opposites Attract cartridge. So one is quite an upright, blocky font, which is what I've used for the band, and then the other is a more fluid, almost a writing style for the words natural and beautiful. So once I've spaced them out and I'm happy they're going to fit, I'm going to glue them into position. So that's the word natural, and then moving on to the word beautiful. And you can see I've got a little pile of glue on my craft mat, and then I'm tapping the glue onto the back of the letters. Okay, so it's out with my little sewing machine again. I've got a change of thread. I've gone more with those purpley tones, and I just wanted to add another frame around the complete tag this time. And of course I had to take that daisy head off again, but never mind, you know how easy it is to stick back on again, off again, on again, off again. And I really liked how my ribbon had turned out, so I just wanted to add a couple of extra little pieces of ribbon, as well as the piece that I intend to tie at the top of the tag. So I'm just doubling up the ribbon and then creating a little loop on the side of my tag. So I've got one on the bottom and one on the top. And then I'm just stapling them in position. I think I've got that one a bit short, so I'll try that again. So just trying that again. A little bit fiddly, hence the reason I bring it right close to me to try and get hold of that ribbon with that staple. And I'm also going to cover the back of my tag. That will do two things. One, it will give me another frame, and two, it will cover up that ribbon and make sure that that stitching is nice and secure. So you can see I'm going to add a second frame to the tag really, but I want to make sure this is really, really thin, just a hint of that purple all the way around the edge. So I'm adding my glue, and then you can see I'm really coming up close to that edge. Now, because of the stitching, I really need to make sure that I press down well to make sure that this attaches, and then I can re-stick my daisy. Hopefully I won't have to cut its head off anymore, as my tag is almost finished. So just trimming round now with my scissors. And then I can attach the ribbon to the top of the tag. And I'm just going for a simple looped through, and I've got two layers of ribbon, so I'll have 4 little tassels of ribbon at the top of my tag. So you can see how well the ribbon matches my project, and I just feel that it needs a little tiny bit of bling to finish things off. And I've got these lovely little dazzlers from Hobby House, and I have got the perfect shade of purple. So I was thinking of adding 2 as I've got a little gap here, but I think I'll just go with the 1. Then it was time to get on with my sampler, and I've used exactly the same techniques, only this time I'm working on a 3-inch square, and you can see January and February's little sampler by the side of me there, just making sure I get everything the right size. So I've painted and decoupaged my iris, and I've added my little word. This time I'm using Beauty, and I'm just finishing off my stitching. So I'm just trimming everything down to size because I want to add the frame of colour around the outside. This time I'm just going to be using the purple so that it matches in with the previous little sampler squares. Again, I've chosen to add a couple of those little ribbon loops, which I'm attaching with my stapler before I add that final frame. Again, I'm going to glue this into position. And I'm adding the month with these little Tim Holtz stickers. So as I add this little bit of sparkle and finish off my little sampler square, for those of you that don't know, I'm making a square along with each of my tags, and I hope to frame them at the end of the year. So I should have 12 little sampler squares of all the fun that I had playing along with this challenge. And you can see I've already got 4, so we're a third of the way through the year already. You can see each month we've been doing lots and lots of different things, lots of different colour schemes, lots of different techniques to explore, and I really hope that you are inspired by this video to go along and take part yourself. It really is a great fun challenge, and it's always lovely to see what everybody comes up with as a result of Tim Holtz's inspiration. So before I go, I just wanted to say a great big thank you to everybody for all their support over the past few weeks, where I've been waiting to see whether I make it onto the Graphic 45 design team. Unfortunately, I didn't make it this year, so maybe I'll try again next year. But your support really did mean a lot to me. It really warmed my heart, all the good will messages, and everybody's got their fingers crossed, and now finally you can uncross them, and I'll let you know if I try out again next year. But I had great fun trying out, and it really is worth it if you like crafting and you want to be involved in design work. It's definitely worth trying out, even if you don't succeed. And a big congratulations to everybody that did get through. It's going to be an exciting year, I'm sure, and I look forward to seeing what you come up with. So until next time, if you've enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button, the subscribe button and the share button, and I look forward to crafting again with you very soon. Until next time, thank you for watching. So here's the link back to my blog where you can read the post that I wrote about this tag. Particularly interesting if you want to know what the challenge is all about, and you'll find the link to Tim Holtz's blog over there as well. And I'm also going to be sharing a link to my 2000 and I think it's 13 is when I first started videoing these. I've been playing along since 2012. So this is the link to that playlist. This is the link to last year, 2014, when I created this little tag. You can see my lovely rubber dance shell stamp at the bottom there. And then last but not least, where do I put all these tags? And the answer is I designed this little tag storage in order to do that. And you can make this up in so many different ways. So if you fancy making some tag storage for yourself, then please click on this link and it will take you to my Etsy shop where you'll be able to purchase your online workshop, and I will talk you through how to make this. It's a full set of videos that talk you through step by step how to cover and construct this project, and also gives you some ideas on how to personalise it to suit your taste. I've even done a Christmas version, so this is an Advent version. It contains 25 tags, and I have photographs, or it's intended for photographs on the run up to Christmas, so you can put a photograph a day and do a little bit of journaling on the back of each tag. So you can see there's a tag for each day, all prettily decorated, and on the other side you can add your photo and your journaling. So if you purchase any of my online workshops, you will get full video instructions as well as PDF photograph instructions as well. So you definitely can get from A to B and make something like this for yourself. I made this one actually for Tim Holtz, but unfortunately he didn't survive the journey back to America, but he almost had a little bit of tag storage of his own. So I hope you take a minute just to click on this link and check out what workshops I have available at the moment in my Etsy shop, and just to let you know there are more coming very soon.